Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking at a massive stack of medical research, anatomy textbooks, and historical records today to try and fundamentally understand, the ultimate engine inside your chest, the human heart. And the mission here isn't just to memorize some diagram from high school biology. It's to really understand how this thing is built, how it fuels itself, and just the centuries-long struggle to figure out what it actually does.
Yeah, and before we even get into the plumbing and the electrical grid of this thing, we really need to address this wild fact from the sources that it kind of recontextualizes human history.
Oh, totally.
It completely shatters what you think you know about medical history. Because for roughly 1,400 years, the greatest medical minds on the planet did not believe the heart was a pump. The prevailing scientific consensus was that the human heart was, well, a furnace.
A literal furnace, like a fire in the basement.
Essentially, yes.
Yeah.
The leading theory was that the heart was the seat of this innate heat, and that it actually burned your blood as fuel to warm the rest of the body.
Wow.
And that idea was so deeply entrenched, so protected by dogma, that it took centuries of illegal dissections and rogue anatomists to finally dismantle it.
Which is just crazy to think about because the heart is the one organ we tie directly to the very concept of life itself, right? I mean, even our definition of death was built entirely around it.
Right, exactly.
Up until the mid-20th century, the medical definition of death was universally understood as just, when the heart stops. It was a simple binary. Engine on, you're alive. Engine off, you're dead.
But then mechanical ventilators forced society to rewrite that definition entirely.
Right.
Because in the 1960s, we suddenly had these machines that could force a heart to keep beating in a patient who had, absolutely zero brain activity. So the machine we built was overriding the machine inside us.
It's kind of profound when you phrase it like that.
It really is.
Yeah.
And because of that technology, a Harvard Medical Committee in 1968 had to formally establish brain death criteria. The old definition it no longer matched reality.
We literally had to move the goalposts for death simply because we finally figured out how to artificially mimic the engine. I actually like to think about the heart like a miraculous house.
Okay, I like that analogy.
Yeah, because you've got the plumbing system moving the water, and you've got the electrical system keeping the lights on, and they are both running completely independently of the homeowner's instructions. You cannot consciously tell your heart to beat, but it just keeps doing it. Over 100,000 times a day.
It's relentless.
Yeah.
But to understand how that's even possible, and to understand what those ancient doctors were looking at when they mistakenly saw a furnace, we first need to look at the actual physical architecture of that house. Because it is beautifully, functionally asymmetrical.
Okay, so let's start with the basic specs, because I think a lot of people picture this massive hulking organ just taking up their whole chest.
Right, like an alien in a sci-fi movie.
Exactly. But in an adult, it's really only about the size of a closed fist,
Right.
weighing maybe 250 to 350 grams. And here is a massive misconception bust right out of the gate. It does not sit on the left side of your chest.
No, it doesn't. That is such an incredibly common myth. The heart actually sits right in the central compartment of the chest. It's an area called the mediastinum, and it's nestled directly behind the sternum. Right between the lungs.
So wait, when we pledge allegiance or put our hand over our heart during a national anthem, why are we all touching the far left side of our ribcage?
Well, it's an illusion caused by a tilt. So while the bulk of the organ is centrally located, it is not perfectly straight. It's shaped roughly like a blunt, sort of lopsided cone.
Definitely not the perfectly symmetrical shape of the heart emoji on your phone.
Right, definitely not. So the pointed bottom tip of that cone, which is called the apex, it angles down and points towards your left side, roughly the space between your fifth and sixth ribs. And that apex just happens to be where the strongest muscular contraction occurs. So the reverberation you actually feel against your chest wall, the thump, is on the left.
So it's just a lopsided pyramid throwing its weight around.
That is a great way to put it.
So let's walk through the plumbing of this house. Because if we trace one single drop of blood through the system, we see this strict, one-way closed loop.
Right. So we start with deoxygenated blood. This is blood that is already circulated through your body and, dropped off its oxygen.
The used up stuff.
Exactly. It returns to the heart through two massive veins. The superior vena cava draining the upper body and the inferior vena cava draining the lower body. And they empty that depleted blood into the very first chamber, the right atrium.
Okay, so we're in the foyer. Chamber 1.
Right. From the right atrium, the blood drops down through a trapdoor called the tricuspid valve. And it gets that name because it actually has three little flaps, or cusps, that open and close.
Tricuspid. Makes sense.
Yeah. So that drops the blood into the second chamber, the right ventricle. The right ventricle then flexes, pushing that blood up through the pulmonary valve and out toward the lungs to get fresh oxygen.
Wait, hold on. Through the pulmonary artery, right?
That is the vessel, yes.
Okay, here's where I get totally tripped up by the biology.
What's that?
Doesn't the pulmonary artery carry deoxygenated blood? I mean, I was always taught that arteries carry the red oxygen-rich blood and veins carry the blue deoxygenated blood.
Oh, yeah. It's a very common point of confusion, mostly because of how color-coded diagrams look in textbooks.
Right, exactly. Red and blue.
But the classification of arteries and veins actually has absolutely nothing to do with oxygen content. It is strictly about the direction of flow.
Oh, really?
Yes. An artery is simply any vessel carrying blood away from the heart, and a vein is any vessel carrying blood toward the heart.
Okay.
So the pulmonary artery is carrying blood away from the heart to the lungs. It just happens to be the one unique exception in your entire body, the only artery that carries deoxygenated blood.
Ah, so it's an architectural definition, not a cargo definition.
Exactly.
That completely clears it up. Okay, so the blood gets pumped out the pulmonary artery to the lungs, it drops off the carbon dioxide, picks up fresh oxygen.
And then it travels back to the heart via the pulmonary veins, which, inversely, are the only veins in the body carrying fully oxygenated blood.
Interesting.
So they empty into the third chamber, the left atrium.
The freshly oxygenated holding room.
You got it.
Yeah.
Then it passes through one more valve into the fourth and final chamber, the left ventricle. And this valve is the mitral valve, also known as the bicuspid valve, because it only has two flaps.
Right.
And there's actually a fun historical footnote here. It was named the mitral valve by the famous 16th century anatomist Andreas Vesalius. He thought the two flaps looked exactly like a mitre, which is, that tall, pointed hat worn by bishops.
That is amazing. Vesalius is elbows deep in a dissection, sees a heart valve, and immediately thinks of a bishop's hat. I love the human element of anatomy.
It really paints a picture.
It does. So now our drop of fully oxygenated blood is sitting in the left ventricle.
And this is the powerhouse chamber. The left ventricle contracts with incredible force, blasting the blood up through the final door, the aortic valve, and out into the aorta, which is the body's largest artery, to be distributed literally everywhere, from your brain down to your toes.
So if we pull back and look at that whole four-chamber loop, why does this specific pathway matter so much? Because I feel like it brings us right back to that functional asymmetry you mentioned earlier.
It absolutely does.
When you put the right ventricle next to the left ventricle, they are not created equal, are they?
Not at all. If you were holding a human heart in your hands, the very first thing you'd notice is the thickness of the walls. The muscular wall of the left ventricle is 2 to 4 times thicker than the right ventricle.
2 to 4 times. I mean, that's a massive difference in muscle mass for two chambers sitting right next to each other.
Right, but it all comes down to physics and resistance. The right ventricle only has to push blood next door to the lungs. It's a very short trip through a very spongy organ, so it encounters very low resistance.
It's an easy commute.
Exactly. The mean pressure in the pulmonary artery is only about 15 millimeters of mercury. It's a gentle, low-pressure system.
Just a polite little nudge over to the lungs.
But the left ventricle, it has to blast that blood to the top of your head against gravity and all the way down to your feet, pushing against the resistance of tens of thousands of miles of blood vessels in your entire body.
Wow.
So to do that, it has to generate a peak systolic pressure of about 120 millimeters of mercury, which is 8 times higher than the right side.
And that's exactly why when you get your blood pressure read at the doctor, they're looking for that 120/80 number.
Yeah.
That 120 is measuring the sheer brute force of the left ventricle flexing.
Precisely. And because the left ventricle acts as the primary workhorse, facing all that high resistance day in and day out, it takes the brunt of the wear and tear over a lifetime.
That makes total sense.
Yeah, this is the anatomical reason why the left ventricle is the chamber most frequently implicated in heart failure. When someone has chronically high blood pressure, that left ventricle has to work so hard that the muscle actually thickens and stiffens, and it eventually just exhausts itself.
Okay, so if this left ventricle is generating 8 times the pressure of the right side, and it's doing it 100,000 times a day without taking a break, how does the muscle itself survive? I mean, a normal bicep or calf muscle doing that amount of work would just cramp up, run out of oxygen, and die within an hour.
It's a great question. It requires a massive, uninterrupted supply of fuel. And to guarantee that fuel, the heart structurally gives itself first priority.
Obvious.
Right. The very first blood vessels to branch off the aorta, mere millimeters past the aortic valve, are the left and right coronary arteries. They wrap around the outside of the heart muscle like a crown, which is actually where the word coronary comes from,
Yeah.
to supply the heart tissue with freshly oxygenated blood before the rest of the body even gets a drop.
See, I always think of this like a chef eating in their own kitchen. You'd think the chef, having first access to the food, would just take a bite right while they're actively tossing the pans.
Right. You'd assume so.
Logically, you'd assume the heart takes its bite of oxygen right when it's actively squeezing, during systole when the blood is shooting out at maximum pressure.
It makes intuitive sense, but the physical mechanics of the heart actually make that impossible.
Really? Why?
During systole, when the heart muscle contracts, it squeezes so incredibly hard to generate that 120 millimeters of mercury that the muscle fibers actually act like a vice grip on their own coronary arteries.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the physical pressure of the squeeze pinches the blood vessels shut, effectively choking off the heart's own blood supply while it works.
Wait, so it's flexing so hard it literally strangles its own fuel lines?
Yes. Because of that, the heart is the only organ in the body that feeds itself while it rests. It can only receive blood during diastole, that split-second relaxation phase between beats. When the muscle relaxes, the vice grip releases, and the blood flows into the coronary arteries.
That is mind-blowing, and it exposes a really dangerous vulnerability, doesn't it?
How do you mean?
Well, if your resting heart rate gets way too fast, let's say you have an untreated arrhythmia, or you're under extreme prolonged stress, you're having more beats per minute, which means you are drastically shortening that relaxation phase.
Yes. The math becomes very problematic for the muscle. If the heart beats too fast, there physically isn't enough diastolic time for the coronary arteries to refill.
Right.
So the muscle begins to starve itself of oxygen, even if your overall blood pressure looks totally normal. The heart is a machine that absolutely requires its fraction of a second rest periods just to survive the day.
Speaking of the beat, we have to talk about the sound. The classic lub-dub, because for most of my life, I honestly thought that sound was the actual thick muscle crunching together.
Most people do. But the muscle contraction itself is virtually silent. The sound is entirely mechanical. It's caused by the valves,
Okay.
because the four chambers don't squeeze all at once. The two upper atria contract first, priming the ventricles below with a final splash of blood. Then, a fraction of a second later, the two massive ventricles contract together. The lub-dub sound is just the acoustic shockwave of the doors slamming shut.
So the lub is...
The lub is the tricuspid and mitral valves snapping shut at the exact moment the ventricles start to squeeze.
Okay, so they lock the upper doors so the high-pressure blood doesn't blow backward into the atria.
Exactly. Then the blood shoots out to the body and lungs. And the moment the ventricles finish squeezing and start to relax, the dub happens.
And that's the pulmonary and aortic valves slamming shut.
Right, catching the blood so it doesn't fall back down into the ventricles.
Slap, slap, lub-dub. It's literally just plumbing in action. But what is coordinating the timing of those door slams? We know there's an electrical system, but I think a huge misconception is that the brain acts like a puppeteer, sending a signal down a nerve to flex the heart, the same way I send a signal to flex my arm.
Yeah, we are so used to our brain being the command center for movement that we just project that onto the heart.
Yeah.
But, if you look at a donor heart being transported in a cooler for a transplant, it has had all its nerve connections to the brain severed.
Right.
Yet it continues to beat entirely on its own.
Because the electrical grid, the actual generator, is built into the walls of the house itself.
Exactly. The heartbeat originates from a cluster of specialized cells called the sinoatrial node, or SA node, which is located in the upper wall of the right atrium.
Okay.
And unlike your skeletal muscles that need a nerve to tell them to move, these SA node cells have a unique feature called leaky cell membranes. Yeah. Sodium and calcium ions are constantly leaking into these cells, building up a positive electrical charge until pop. It crosses a threshold and fires an electrical spark. And it does this spontaneously 60 to 100 times a minute.
Wow, it's just a built-in biological metronome.
It really is. That spark washes over the atria, hits a relay station called the AV node, and then shoots down into the ventricles through specialized wires called Purkinje fibers. The brain and the nervous system are basically just conductors.
So they don't start the beat.
No, they can release adrenaline to hit the gas pedal or acetylcholine to hit the brake, but they do not turn the engine on. The engine runs itself.
And the fail-safes built into this grid are incredible because if your SA node suddenly fails and stops sparking, your heart doesn't just stop.
Right, the heart is wired with triple redundancy. If the SA node fails, that relay station, the AV node, will automatically take over as the backup pacemaker.
Just takes over.
Yeah, its cells also leak ions, just at a slower rate. It will generate a steady rhythm of about 40 to 60 beats per minute.
And if the AV node gets damaged?
Then the Purkinje fibers, deep in the ventricles, will take over as the pacemaker of last resort. They generate a rhythm of about 20 to 40 beats per minute.
Which is really slow.
It's barely enough to keep a person conscious, but it keeps the blood moving. It keeps you alive.
So if the plumbing is this brilliantly engineered and the electricity is this autonomous, and you can literally just cut open a chest and look at the pipes, how is it possible that humanity spent 1,400 years thinking this thing was a furnace? What were the ancient doctors actually seeing when they cut someone open?
Well, they were seeing a system devoid of pressure. See, when a person dies, the arterial system empties out and the blood pools in the venous side.
Oh.
So when early anatomists like Herophilus and Erastratus in Alexandria around the 3rd century BCE performed their dissections, they found the arteries completely empty.
So what did they think they were for?
They assumed these vessels carried air, or pneuma, from the lungs.
Which completely sets the stage for the most dominant and incorrect medical model in human history.
The Galen model. Yeah, in the 2nd century CE, Galen of Pergamon, who was a highly respected physician to Roman emperors, he synthesized a system that would rule medicine until the Renaissance.
And what was his theory?
Galen believed blood didn't circulate at all. He thought it was manufactured in the liver from digested food, flowed outward through the veins like a slow tide, and was simply consumed by the body's tissues as fuel.
But wait, if blood isn't circulating, how did Galen explain blood getting from the right side of the heart over to the left side?
He couldn't.
Yeah.
He looked at the solid muscular wall between the ventricles, the septum, and since he didn't understand the pulmonary loop going to the lungs, he invented a mechanism.
He just made something up.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Galen claimed that blood leaked from the right ventricle to the left ventricle through invisible microscopic pores in the septum.
Invisible pores, of course. When science doesn't work, just invent magic holes.
Right. But, to be fair to history, the Islamic Golden Age challenged this long before Europe woke up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in 1242, a physician in Damascus and Cairo named Ibn al-Nafis wrote a text explicitly rejecting Galen's invisible pores. He correctly reasoned that the septum was solid and that blood had to travel from the right ventricle through the lungs and back to the left side.
So he mapped out pulmonary circulation?
He did, 3 centuries before European anatomists.
But his work was effectively lost, right?
Tragically, yes. It was unknown in the West until a manuscript was rediscovered in a Berlin library in 1924. So the mainstream European medical narrative was entirely stuck on Galen's furnace and liver blood model.
Until we get to William Harvey.
Yeah.
Enter William Harvey in 1628. He publishes a book called De Motu Cordis on the Motion of the Heart, and he finally breaks the 1,400-year-old Galen model. And he doesn't just do it by looking at the anatomy, he does it using math.
And it remains one of the most elegant scientific arguments ever constructed. Harvey quantified the flow. He estimated that the human heart holds roughly 2 ounces of blood.
Okay.
And if a heart beats 72 times a minute, that's 144 ounces of blood pumped per minute.
So in 1 hour, that's over 8,600 ounces.
Which is over 500 pounds of blood. Harvey's math proved that if Galen was right, and the body was constantly consuming blood made by the liver would have to magically manufacture 3 times a person's entire body weight in blood every single hour.
Right, which is just physically impossible.
Exactly. The only way the math worked was if a fixed, finite volume of blood was being rapidly recirculated in a closed loop. The heart had to be a mechanical pump.
But Harvey had a missing link, didn't he? Because he knew blood went out the arteries and came back the veins, but he couldn't physically see how they connected?
Right, because capillaries, the microscopic vessels that connect arteries to veins in our tissues, are way too small to see with the naked eye. Harvey predicted they must exist based on the math, but he died before he could prove it.
Oh, man.
But that final puzzle piece came in 1661 from Marcello Malpighi. He used one of the world's first microscopes to look at frog lung tissue, and there they were, the capillaries.
It's just an amazing triumph of science, but I do want to highlight the real-world tragic consequences of it taking 1,400 years to figure this out.
Yeah.
Because if doctors believed Galen, that blood was constantly being manufactured by the liver and consumed by the body, then their diagnosis for almost every illness, from a fever to a headache, was excess blood.
Which led directly to the practice of bloodletting, the deliberate draining of a patient's veins to, rebalance the humors.
Right. I mean, look at what happened to George Washington.
Oh, yeah.
In 1799, the first president of the United States gets a severe throat infection. His doctors, who are the most educated, elite physicians in the country, they decide the treatment is to bleed him.
Yeah, standard practice at the time.
Over the course of about 10 hours, they drain an estimated 5 to 9 pints of blood from him. That is 40 to 60% of his entire blood volume.
Yeah.
He died that same night.
It's highly probable the treatment accelerated his death far faster than the throat infection would have. I mean, they bled him to death because they fundamentally misunderstood the plumbing.
It's horrifying to think that a misunderstanding of plumbing killed a president. But if I'm being honest, even today, with all our modern medicine, the general public still completely misunderstands how this machine breaks down.
Very true.
There is a massive confusion between a plumbing problem and an electrical problem.
And confusing the two in an emergency is genuinely dangerous because the interventions are completely different.
Let's break down the classic mix-up then. A heart attack versus cardiac arrest.
Sure. So a heart attack, which is medically known as a myocardial infarction, is strictly a plumbing problem.
Okay.
One of those coronary arteries on the outside of the heart gets blocked, usually by plaque buildup that ruptures and forms a clot. The blood flow stops, and the heart muscle downstream starts to starve and die from lack of oxygen.
Right, so the pipe is clogged.
Exactly. And you treat plumbing problems with plumbing solutions. You administer clot-busting drugs, or you go into a cath lab and insert a physical stent to prop the pipe open.
But the heart is usually still beating during a heart attack.
Yes.
A cardiac arrest, on the other hand?
Cardiac arrest is a catastrophic electrical failure. The SA node or the backup pacemakers lose their rhythm, the electrical signal degenerates into chaotic static, which is known as ventricular fibrillation, and the heart just quivers.
It just stops pumping.
Right. It stops pumping blood entirely, even though the coronary pipes might be perfectly clear. You treat an electrical problem with an electrical solution, a massive shock from a defibrillator to stun the erratic cells and allow the SA node to reboot the system.
So in the movies, when a character clutches their chest, yells, "I'm having a heart attack,"
Yeah.
passes out, and the doctors rush in and immediately grab the shock paddles.
Oh, it drives cardiologists crazy. You do not shock a beating heart just because a pipe is clogged. You shock a heart that has lost its electrical rhythm.
Right.
Now, a massive heart attack can traumatize the muscle so much that it triggers a secondary electrical arrest, but they are two distinctly different emergencies.
Which is exactly why modern CPR training so clearly separates cases where you do chest compressions to manually pump the blood during an arrest from cases where a conscious person is having chest pain and you just need to call 911.
Exactly.
And while we're talking about modern discoveries, there's a fascinating condition that shows how intertwined the brain and the heart really are. Takotsubo cardiomyopathy. I've heard this called broken heart syndrome.
Yes, first identified by Japanese researchers in 1990. It usually occurs after an intense emotional or physical shock like sudden grief, extreme fear, a catastrophic life event.
So a massive surge of stress hormones.
Right, like adrenaline just floods the system.
And the sources say it actually changes the physical shape of the heart.
Drastically.
Yeah.
When that wave of adrenaline hits, it essentially stuns the left ventricle. But it doesn't stun it evenly. The muscle cells at the very bottom of the heart, the apex, have a much higher density of adrenaline receptors than the top of the heart.
Oh, interesting.
So the bottom half gets so overwhelmed by the hormones that it paralyzes and balloons out, while the top half continues to squeeze normally. The left ventricle temporarily takes on the shape of a takotsubo, which is a Japanese octopus trap with a wide bulbous bottom and a narrow neck.
So when doctors scan a patient with this, the heart muscle is barely squeezing at the bottom. It looks exactly like a massive lethal heart attack.
It looks identical on some tests, but when they actually check the plumbing, the coronary arteries are totally clear.
Wow.
The stress hormones have basically paralyzed the muscle without blocking a single pipe. It's just a vivid reminder that while the heart's electrical grid is autonomous, the chemical environment controlled by the brain can still overwhelm the system.
It really is. So to kind of bring this all home for you listening, all this anatomy, all these centuries of debates, it maps directly onto your everyday life.
It really does.
When a doctor places a cold stethoscope on your chest, they aren't just listening vaguely. They are moving it to specific acoustic windows over your sternum to hear those exact mitral and aortic valves slamming shut.
And if you ever have to perform CPR, the reason you interlock your hands and press directly on the center of the sternum is because you are physically trapping those ventricles between the breastbone and the spine, mechanically forcing the blood out of the chambers to keep the brain alive.
Even modern miracles like TAVR surgeries, where they thread a catheter up through an artery in your leg to replace a faulty heart valve without ever opening your chest, it all relies on navigating the exact closed-loop highway William Harvey figured out with math in 1628.
Yeah.
Even the fitness tracker you might be wearing on your wrist right now is just giving you a live digital feed of your SA node sparking, navigating a 5-liter per minute workload.
The heart is just an absolute marvel of biological engineering.
It truly is. So we want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the engine of the human body, but we do want to leave you with one final, slightly haunting thought based on our research today.
Yeah, this is a good one.
We talked about how the heart's electrical system is completely independent. Well, if you take individual cardiac muscle cells and place them in a petri dish in a lab and just keep them warm and oxygenated, they will spontaneously begin to beat rhythmically on their own, completely independent of a brain, a body, or a nervous system.
Unprompted, isolated cells, just pulsing in a dish.
So what does that say about the nature of life itself? Are our bodies really these top-down machines run entirely by the command center of the conscious brain? Or are we just passengers, a walking vessel for billions of microscopic metronomes that have a life, a rhythm, and a drive entirely of their own? It's just, something for you to ponder next time you sit quietly and feel your pulse.